For being here today. We've heard concerns that the new tax on medical cannabis is unfair to vulnerable Canadians who rely on this therapy to manage pain and other chronic conditions. And this bill adds another $1 a gram in excise tax, which many patients say they can't afford to pay. While other drugs are tax-free, this adds another 10% on top of what sick people already pay. Why are you introducing a new tax on Canadian patients?
So clearly we've heard this concern. So there's a number of ways that we've addressed this. So the two straightforward ones. First of all, the low THC marijuana is not in the category of attracting the tax. Secondly, if marijuana gets a drug identification number and is clearly shown to be medically necessary, then we will, in fact, have it exempted as well. So to the extent that that happens, and I know people are working in that regard, then that will actually attract the exemption. And then we also have a tax credit that I'll ask Andrew to describe around medical taxes.
So the medical expense tax credit applies for people who have extraordinary drug costs, that is over a certain dollar limit or 3% of taxable income. The credit applies at 15%, and an equivalent credit is available at the provincial level, so that kind of helps offset the cost of prescription drugs. And medical cannabis also qualifies for that tax credit.
If I might just, Minister, go back to the 2 points you made about the attempt to get a DIN number, and I'm wondering where is that in the process, because we have heard something about that, but it's a fairly, from what we've heard, it's a fairly complicated process.
Do you know the...
So there is currently one cannabis-derived prescription drug that has a drug identification number. I believe there are several, I'm not sure how many, in the process. Of course, the process is a rigorous one. The government is committed to look at ways to improve, to accelerate the approval process while maintaining the rigor of the testing. And that's my information.
So, all very complex pieces in place here. However, I still go back to the original question and say there are checks and balances that the existing system has in place. And, you know, we've heard there may be complications. People wanting to use recreational marijuana will use medicinal marijuana. However, the checks and balances ensure, for example, that doctors write a prescription similar to what they do for other prescription drugs. So what's wrong with taking that approach?
Well, I appreciate that people have different points of view, but the prescriptions are written for medically necessary drugs with drug identification numbers. And that's how we've come to the conclusion that having a drug identification number would be the appropriate way for us to create the exemption that's required. Obviously, we're trying to create integrity around the taxation system to make sure that we ensure that people that are using something for recreational purposes are differentiated from people that are using it for medical purposes. If in fact it is for medical purposes, then presumably it has the capacity to get a drug identification number. So I recognize that as we implement a new system, there will be changes that will that will present challenges to certain individuals, and we're trying to come up with an approach that both recognizes their current situation, but also recognizes the new reality that that marijuana will be available legally, and that's a source of supply for people.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Minister. Move on.